Hey YouTube, Bill here. I got a problem. My problem is apples. I've gotten a whole lot of apples at the very end of the season with the idea I was going to make some cider for Thanksgiving. Ended up I ran out of time, never got to make my cider. Now my apples are in the way in the kitchen and they're starting to well, not starting. A lot of them have actually full on gone bad. They're not great. So they haven't been refrigerated, so they're not firm and crisp apples, even though they're late season apples. I just don't have the fridge space for that. So at this point, they're only good for two things. One is turning them into compost, or two is turning them into applesauce. I suppose there's a third option. I could dump them in the field across the street and let the deer have them. But any of those options, the best one is one that gives food for me. The problem with applesauce is I already have a whole lot of applesauce canned up and preserved. So I need to come up with something else. And I came up with my something else, which is I'm going to go ahead and try and make some fruit leather here. Let's get started. Here's the equipment we're going to need for making applesauce in general and the dehydrator. Mine is a Nesco American Harvest, really old dehydrator. We need the apples, obviously, and some sugar. Probably a little water for making the applesauce. The stick blender will be using. You can use a regular blender if you want to use that. I prefer the stick blender. And other than that, we just need something to cut up the apples, and since the apples are since we have a lot of bad apples, we'll need that to cut out the chunks of bad apple. First step, washing the apples. Second step, cutting the apples. One of the problems with cutting apples that are a little too far gone is the skins usually kind of toughen up, get a little thick, and you can't really cut through them easily. So you can see we'll just cut out bad spots, any spots that are less than optimal. But the apples will be fine for applesauce. I got a lot of apples to go, and a lot more apples to go. Even at time lapse, this is going to take a long time. I'm probably going to fill this entire pot. So I'll do a little magic. Malice dissectum. Whew, that was tough work. Good thing magic makes everything easier. So we're all processed into apple chunks. Now we got to turn those apple chunks into applesauce. My method of doing applesauce is just add some arbitrary amount of water to the bottom, roughly, depending on how many apples I have, and just keeps them from scorching or sticking on the bottom. You can follow an applesauce recipe if you want. To start, it's just apples and water. Now, since we're making fruit leather, we'll have to add some sugar because it needs a little more sugar to actually give it that chewy texture in the dehydrator. But we'll get to that in a bit. Little bit of time, couple of stirs, making some nice progress. We got a little more time, a few more stirs. At this point, if you want to add any extra flavors, you can go ahead and do that. Cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, whatever you want, clove. Depends on how you want it. In my case, I'm going to add some ginger. I'm using just dried powdered ginger. Just roughly by eye. I have a lot of applesauce here, so I'll give it a taste after once it's smooth, and if I need to add a little bit more, I can go ahead and do that. Now we hold off on adding the sugar because we need to find out how sweet it's really going to be These are late season apples, so they're fairly sweet already. But you definitely need it to be on the sweeter side, much sweeter than regular applesauce. So we'll have to taste test it after too and figure out how much sugar we need. We're on to the final step for making applesauce, which is we gotta blend it. We need it smooth. Now, if by chance you did not own a food processor or a blender or stick blender or any kind of thing like that, you can go ahead and do this where you peel all the apples and just use a potato masher. And if you cook it long enough, you won't even need the potato masher. I leave the skins on because when you blend it all up, the skins disappear into it, and it adds a little additional fiber. And I'm going to go ahead and keep blending this until it gets smooth, and we'll see how it looks after the end. So we're down here now with all nice smooth applesauce. You can see all the little bits of peel have turned into very little. You want it fairly smooth because if there's chunks, then it won't really work with the texture of fruit leather. And we'll taste it, and if it needs more sugar, probably want to add, for this kind of volume, it's probably a quarter cup at a time to see how sweet it is. We probably won't need much because these are late season apples. But if we actually go ahead and we're doing a normal amount of fruit leather, we end up with probably add a tablespoon at a time because you probably only have something like a quart of applesauce. So we'll go ahead and taste it and figure out how much sugar we need. So I added about a half a cup of brown sugar. You can use any sugar you want. I used brown sugar. Just figure the slight molasses flavor would give it a little bit of richness. And I added 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, which may or may not be required if you have tart apples, fresh apples. These were, as I said at the beginning, probably about a month and a half old, maybe 2. I don't remember when we actually picked them, but they were kind of getting a little dull in their flavor. So I brought some lemon juice to the picture to brighten them up. And the final step for making fruit leather is we have to pour it out into the dehydrator trays to somewhere around a 1/4 inch thick. And that's where that jar at the beginning as equipment will come in handy, because anything left at the end will have to go in the jar till I can do the next batch tomorrow. As I said, we get the final step here. We got to pour out the applesauce into the dehydrator tray. We want it about a 1/4 inch thick, and the way it works, I found that works best is like the little lip here on the edges of the tray will hold just about the right amount. There we go. Smooth it out a little so that we get a uniform thickness across the whole tray. If we get a little crooked, it will end up uneven. We don't want that, because then there'll be big thick chunks and then thin chunks. Now we'll repeat the process with the rest of the trays. And we're done loading the trays. So we got 4 fruit leather trays, and then I put the cover on, and we want to set for 135. You can do this in your oven. It'll take less time, and I find that it comes out a little more crispy on the edges, especially. But this works. It works better if you can get the lower temperature. It dries slower. But that's pretty much it. And we'll follow up at the end with how it looks when it's done. It'll probably be as little as 4 hours, as much as 8, 9, 10 hours. I'll probably not even bother checking this till tomorrow morning. And it's currently 1:30 right now, so I might check it tonight right before bed. If it's done, I'll stop it. But otherwise, See when it's done through the miracle of YouTube magic. No spell this time, just time. And here we are. I checked it last night and it wasn't even close. You can see now it's pretty much done. Nice and dry. It's not sticky anymore. Now for the fun part, peeling it up. Getting it started is always a tough part. I've seen some things where they say oil these trays, but in my opinion then you end up with oil on the underside of the fruit leather. So I just gonna have to use two hands here, but I need to get the edge up here. There's a completed sheet of fruit leather. Now what we can do is we can put it on a sheet of parchment. And if these were rectangular, I could cut them up into or roll them up and then cut them up into squares, rectangles, whatever. But because they're round, what I typically do is cut them into a couple of wedges, and then you can roll them up. They won't stick to each other. They won't stick to themselves, and everyone can enjoy them. And that's it. So that's the first batch. It's amazing how all those apples cooked into all that applesauce, which dries down to just very little substance. Think about that next time you go to the supermarket and pay really high prices for things like grapes or apples that are mostly water. But hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Bye.